Now, what I want to talk about in this video is just how bad the negotiations were in this first week when we're talking about trying to bring Russia back in and have conversations with Russia and Ukraine and that sort of thing. This is Michael McFaul talking about the art of a really bad deal on his Substack. Now, first, if you don't know who Michael McFaul is, I cite him fairly regularly. He's a professor of political science at Stanford, Hoover Senior Fellow. So he's not nothing. And then above that, he was also the U.S. ambassador to Russia from 2012 to 2014. So this is, when he speaks, I listen. I don't always agree with him, but on Ukraine, he's largely right. Okay, let's look at this article that he put out on his Substack, The Art of a Really Bad Deal. I've highlighted some stuff here. Okay, let's briefly review who got what so far. So U.S. concessions offered to Putin are things like this. Ukraine has to give up territory to Russia. Now, I don't know why we're talking about that since Russia was the aggressor and Ukraine is giving up territory because they hold it. Like, okay, maybe that's it. Maybe you just don't have any will to go forward. Ukraine cannot join NATO. Trump just said that was off the table. Number 3, if there is an international peacekeeping force in Ukraine, American soldiers will not participate. Okay, well, Biden said that, so there's nothing really new to that one. Number 4, U.S. plans to reduce the number of U.S. soldiers deployed to Europe. Wow. Okay, that's something that Trump wants to do to remove the footprint, to be more isolationist. Zelensky must hold new presidential elections before negotiations to end the war even start. Okay, now that's a non-starter. The Ukrainians will reject that, and they already have. U.S.-Russia relations were formally restarted without any preconditions at a meeting between the Secretary of State Rubio and Foreign Minister Lavrov in Saudi Arabia. There should have been something that the Russians had to concede in order to even get that going because they were isolated from the rest of the world. Number 7, Trump officials hinted at sanctions relief for Russia. Nothing happened, but they hinted at it. Number 8, Trump officials suggested that the 2022 Istanbul Protocols should serve as a negotiation guidepost. That document capped the size of Ukraine's armed forces at 85,000, placed very low limits on the number of tanks, artillery pieces, missiles, and banned Ukraine from purchasing foreign weapons. That was crazy. That's what they were getting when they were trying to overwhelm the Ukrainian system in the early days of the war. And they're using that as a template. That's just foolishness. Number 9, Trump called Zelensky a dictator. Wait a minute. The dictator is in Russia who spent $2 billion to win a rigged election in his own country that his own people know are rigged. And the Ukrainian president was actually freely and fairly elected. Number 10, Trump invited Russia to rejoin the G7. Well, not formally, but he talked about that and said, sure, he should never have been kicked out. Okay. Number 11, at the Munich Security Conference, which McFaul attended, Vice President Vance lectured American allies in Europe on their poor democratic practices without criticizing Russian dictatorship. Now, it's one thing if J.D. Vance had said what he said about Europeans, and that was kind of bad form to do that. But if he had said that and then said, hey, in Russia, you're even worse. What are you doing over here? I mean, this is terrible. That would have been one thing, but that's not where he went. Number 12, the format of the negotiations is very favorable to Russia. Instead of practicing shuttle diplomacy between Kyiv and Moscow, Rubio seems to oversee talks with Russian officials, while General Kellogg is in charge of meetings with Ukrainian officials. In the first meeting between Russian and American officials in Riyadh, Saudi representatives were present, but Ukrainian and European officials were not. Okay, this just seems to be an odd way to start this. 13, the United States voted no on a UN resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In doing so, Trump broke ranks with American democratic allies and sided with Russia, Belarus, North Korea, and other dictatorships. Like, this is a really big breach of what has been the American position for a long, long time. Okay, so these are the U.S. concessions offered to Putin. Now, let's look at U.S. demands of Ukraine. First, an agreement to allow the United States to obtain 50% of all future mining profits from Ukrainian minerals to repay the United States for aid already delivered. Like, you better pay us back. And they're going to get nothing out of that moving forward. Two, and that was a terrible deal. That was embarrassing. Two, no new military or economic assistance. Three, no new sanctions. Four, cutting off USAID assistance to Ukraine already appropriated, including humanitarian aid and financial support for anti-corruption programs. Okay. I don't know that that's necessarily that particular point with USAID. I think that's from Doge, that is not necessarily related to this, but it kind of flows together. Number five, Zelensky must step down as president before negotiations begin. Well, there was talk of that. They didn't actually formalize anything like that, but kind of that's the vibe they were getting. Six, Ukraine has agreed to Trump's mineral deals in the hopes of paving way for long-term U.S. security commitment. While Trump administration has dropped the toughest demands, Ukraine is to establish a fund and contribute 50% of the proceeds from future monetization of state-owned mineral resources, including oil, gas, and associated logistics. This fund would invest in projects in Ukraine. Basically, Ukraine's going to have to pay for Ukraine's own reconstruction. It's the Russians aren't paying for it. This is the craziest thing. The Russia came in and broke stuff, and then they're off the hook. Okay, U.S. demands on Europe. Gets crazier. Europeans will not be represented at the peace negotiations. But isn't it part of Europe? Number two, once a peace settlement is reached, Europe, not the United States, will be responsible for enforcing it, including providing peacekeepers for the deal that they aren't getting to be part of negotiating. Number three, the U.S. will reduce its military footprint in Europe. Some speculated that this might be the beginning of the end of U.S. participation in NATO. Number four, Europeans must improve their democracies, especially regarding censorship issues and migration. Okay, so that's the least bad of those four things. The next thing is U.S. concessions from Russia. One, the release of wrongfully detained American teacher Mark Fogel. I know Mark personally. He was my son's high school teacher, so I'm excited about this achievement, says McFaul. Number two, the promise of new business deals in and with Russia. But that's it. There's nothing more. Not get off their land, not stop doing this kind of thing to your neighbors, not stop with the hybrid warfare. And then Ukraine's concessions from Russia and or the United States, absolutely nothing. How about that? That's pretty rough. So the art of the deal isn't looking like that great of a deal, at least not within the first week. Now, let's look at Tim Snyder's comments. Timothy Snyder is a professor at Yale who specializes in Ukrainian history. It should be astonishing, though it's not, that the American negotiators want to begin from the premise that Russia was right and that Ukraine is not sovereign. That is where they're starting. He just said the thing that I was thinking, but yeah, that's right. Accepting the lies of the aggressor isn't just unethical, it's also unstrategic. Agreeing with Russia that a war of aggression leads to the end of Ukrainian sovereignty is not just morally but factually wrong. It's a complete misreading of what happened these last 3 years, as Ukrainians won crucial battles, took back territory, and proved their existence by any conceivable metric. Any peace will have to begin from legal and political reality. For America at this point in the war, to help Russia undo Ukrainian sovereignty is not just injustice, but a provocation to a much broader war. I fear that Timothy Snyder is correct, and we need to change course, and we need to do that very quickly. All right, that's it. Tell me what you think about this. I think that it's been a really bad week, and negotiations could hardly have started off on a worse footing for Ukraine, given the posture of the Trump administration. Hopefully they'll get better. Don't know if they will. We'll find out in time. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.